Hi, welcome to Elevate, where we talk about everything that's robotics, drones, and technology. We've got with us Pranav, founder of Accio Robotics. Very glad to have you here, Pranav.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Aditya. It's been nice to get to know you for the last 6-7 months, so I'm glad to have this chat.
Perfect. So, for our audience, let's start with what is Accio Robotics? What do you guys do?
So today Accio is we're building solutions for quick commerce primarily at this point. So we're building robots for dark stores. I think globally there's an AI wave. India is going through a quick commerce, so we feel like as a robotics company we definitely have a place in that whole ecosystem. Because for the longest of times we've been building solutions or robots that are optimized for storage density and throughput, and that is essentially what quick commerce needs as well. So we've been exploring that in different form factors, robots as a service to CapEx. Like we've been doing that. We're still experimenting with how it takes shape, and we're probably just about 1 year into that whole journey. But yeah, so we've been building high speed, high throughput, high density robots for warehousing primarily for the last 3 odd years, and that's what we do now. Yeah.
So many things to unpack here. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. What's the origin story of Accio?
Yeah, origin story is I think just a couple of college kids wanting to build cool. I mean, if I can use the word shit, I just wanted to build cool shit. Literally, that's how it started because both me and my co-founder we are batchmates, classmates, and all that. So we've been kind of always exploring a lot of different ideas, and during our second, third year, fourth years of university, and that's when we were like our first idea or our first business concept was to put together a device for visually impaired people because we got to visit a blind school in Vellore. So we were based out of VIT Vellore, so we got an opportunity to visit a blind school in Vellore, and so we were there was always this ick of some form of social contribution and social innovation when we were in college, or for me at least. I've been like always involved in either like late cleanups or teaching kids, and like it's always been like an important part of our my at least for me even till date it's a very important part of how I'm looking at the whole entrepreneurial journey. But at that point, then we were trying to refocus on how do we use all our technical experience to add value to people that are probably not as privileged as I am. That was like the primary genesis, I would say, of the company. So we're still called registered, we still call it Illuminify Technologies because like Illuminate, that's where it like, came from. So apparently we also were into a lot of robotics competitions, and like I was we were like going abroad for events. We were representing the college at different levels, and so there was like a kind of a reputation built around, let's say, the team, our initial team, and robotics and all of that in at least our small engineering world at that point. So that gave us some form of confidence to okay, let's explore hardware. So our first product was a text-to-speech and braille device for visually impaired people, where we were trying to help them read faster because whatever content we all have access to in our say 12th grade, they don't get access to it 2-3 years later because one braille books are way more expensive, and the teaching and learning they're not as many qualified teachers. It's not a very well taken care of ecosystem, at least back in 2019. Now definitely there have been a lot of initiatives over the last 4 or 5 years, a lot of startups working in that space, but it was just not easy, and accessibility was a huge problem. To accessibility, not like goal was with Illuminify to build an ecosystem of devices to really ease up access to knowledge for every form of disability, right? Especially like auditory and visual, and where it's actually more even for people that can't speak, like they have certain parts of their communication that or perception to content in front of them that is not the best. So all of that was our primary vision when we started off. But we around March of 2020, we started the company in April 2019. We really didn't have a very clear plan of where money is going to come from, what's going to happen. None of that. We just were like, we'll start off straight out of college, and somehow serendipitously we were able to land on a few grants to start building out the device.
How did COVID play?
Yeah, so that's where things got. So 2019 we were incubated in our university, and like we were trying to build the whole thing out. March 2020 is when COVID happened, like all of us know, and we just started deploying the devices with like our alpha, like beta testers. Just when that started is when the pandemic happened. So around I think 7th or 8th of March we started doing these tests, and around 18th, I think 18, 19 lockdown was. So now then we were like again clueless on what has to happen. But one thing we were finally doing was we just to keep the company afloat, we used to do a lot of service businesses and a lot of other tertiary streams of revenue to just keep the ball rolling, keep building this device. But the pandemic kind of made it very clear that there's going to be like, I think there was also naivety associated to how we were approaching that phase of our, let's say, business journey, that being extra optimistic on what it's going to take to really deliver this product. It became very clear that with the current capital and the experience and the market forces, it's not going to be easy to build a business with that ideology, because during the pandemic, again, our primary source of revenue was, or any form of cash flow was, either grants or CSR initiatives to deploy these devices. And the device also had a bit of an R&D curve pending, so we were not really ready to go to a corporate and just be like, give us this, we'll handle our CSR initiative, and we didn't have the funds to get through the product cycle as well. So that is when we were like, it's not going to really work out, because neither was the market sure of where COVID is heading, that they were ready to put money into a assistive technology product where there is no clear ROI that the company can justify. Right? So these became again discretionary expenses and not necessarily expenses that would, most companies were figuring out how work from home would be looking, how like say a company, like if you're looking at a lot of industry shutdown, like hospitality shutdown. So out of that, there was too much happening. So we couldn't really get the attention of people to, yeah, this is something that we're solving, and this needs help. So that's when we decided it's time to pivot into something else, and robotics seemed like that ideal entry point, because the team that we had at that juncture also predominantly came with that robotics background. And for me, it felt like going back home, because I was spending time with robots throughout college, and then suddenly there was this whole, I went into consumer hardware for a while, and then now again coming back to robotics kind of also felt a natural progression. So we just started off with building a point A, point B material movement robot, just simple AMR navigation and all of that. The goal was, can we create robots that people can build their solutions on top of. That's how it started. We were able to land a few clients for that application, where we were able to use the robots from warehousing, manufacturing, or to even in kitchens, building out robotic kitchens using the robots and as a platform and things like that. But eventually, it was becoming more and more clear that this is not going to be easy to scale, because you can't sit down and build different use cases. The end customer, the money was only flowing in when you were able to offer end-to-end solution to a customer, and giving a customer just a robot and like telling them to build it on top was kind of not the direction that we at least had access to at that point, because in India, robotics is obviously at a very different stage compared to the global juncture. So especially from market forces, it was not easy to scale at that point. And by then, we had already raised a couple of rounds of funding. Like we raised a seed round with our initial contracts we had. So we had some early backing and some room to experiment. Like so, we were fortunate enough to have some investors initially that gave us that room to experiment on what works in robotics. So, and when we had a nimble enough team that could really juggle different pieces together. And so that's when we kind of arrived at trying to draw parallels to with all the pieces that conclusion that we had. I mean, I can dive deeper into what the pieces were, but the conclusion that we arrived at was we wanted to work on swarm robotic solutions. We knew that the warehousing space was easier to define problem statements for, and we also knew that as a team we already had good enough distribution or good enough eyeballs from this sector, like the warehousing sector. Like anything that we built was easier in the warehousing sector at that point. At least we felt like, again, I can go back, and if I knew that the whole AI wave was going to take shape, I would have obviously thought of things differently. But this was in like again end of 2021. We decided that we would want to go through this change, and so we've been focusing on order picking in warehouses since then. So it started off with
take me through some of these decisions that
Yeah.
you made, right? And what were the choices that you decided not to?
So first we had to make a very important decision of, do we build for India or do we build for the global market initially. Now that decision was based on more than just both of us as founders of the company, what we can do. It was based on how much capital we had. There were constraints that were very pertinent, which is the capital that we had access to, what we felt like we would need to raise an next round of funding, and all of that together. It was clear that India was the place we would have to show some form of product maturity and traction before we can go global. Now this constraint in play, it became very critical to understand what India values. Now India, like all of us know, like we're all trying to build out of India. Like one of the biggest pro and con is the availability of labor. Now with that, any kind of solution, any kind of automation that you come up with, any kind of solution for that matter is going to have an apples to apples comparison on how much cost you save. So it seldom contributes a lot to the revenue side of a business. Like a good marketing tool probably is easier to justify that it would add value to doing better marketing, which will then drive revenue growth and all of that. But in robotics and automation, industry itself is not that mature. Most of our customers are also still figuring out how this fits into their ecosystem. For example, a lot of the customers that we worked with early on, we were the first automation providers for them. So we ended up having to educate them as well on how this is going to pan out, which means costing. So if a customer says no to us, as a startup, this was also a problem, right? We have a lifeline, we have a life expiry date, and that expiry date is dependent on a lot of factors. Now, if a customer, even if I know I'm offering the best robotic solution, if a customer says I want to explore other solutions, first they come and talk to me, then they'll go send RFQs to a lot of companies. By then they come back, it's going to take a year. Even if they realize we are the best company, we might not be alive at that point. So it's very important to nail down the customer very early on and be like, yeah, see, I'll give you what you want, and this is what we have to offer. Don't waste your time, don't waste our time as well, because you might just end up coming back to us. But yeah, we've noticed this, like if we look at a market like the US, because labor is a huge problem for them, and there's a cost and willingness of people to work on these job roles. A lot of these leaders, or a lot of these warehouse managers, or a lot of these even manufacturing, they've already looked at automation as an integral part of their whole operation. So some of these warehouses are designed for automation. Their IT infra is built for automation. This is not something that you can find in there. Like a lot of our initial deployments, we had to figure out the IT infra for them. Now, if the IT infra is going to cost an extra 2.5 lakhs, that is part of your ROI calculation, and then again, it's a huge problem. So we had to kind of pick our battles. Was that okay? If we had to deploy a robot properly abroad, first certification, the timeline associated to that, and then having a team over there, our first robots are definitely not going to be the most stable. We're going to need to offer support maintenance. It's not going to be easy to partner with a system integrator to do this there. So we were looking at least a $500,000 kind of investment to really do justice to the So we have robots deployed abroad even today, but it's through partners, right? But for the partner to trust us with those robots, now over the last 2.5 years, we've built that let's say ecosystem or trust that okay, you can trust us. This is what we have, and this is support that we can offer. Otherwise, you're on your own. So that kind of flow is built now over the experience and as the product is mature. To do justice to this whole thing, and we were estimating that okay, we want to give customer support for about 6 to 8 months, so that the customer experience is not affected, because you don't want your name to be spoiled in the market and all of that. We knew that we needed to invest at least $500,000 to get it right, shipping the robot, setting up a small team of engineers there, stay, pay, and everything together. Yeah. That's when we could actually crack the market. Like otherwise, we should put together some jugaad solutions and try something out. But we didn't want to take that risk, because any market outside of your home market is going to be a huge sink in all aspects, because we are designed to operate in India. So then we kind of narrowed down.
So you made the warehousing decision, you made the India decision.
Yeah, so the warehousing decision was primarily based on the distribution part, and also simplification of, like you said, like simplification of problem statement. That's all. So warehousing decision, India's decision was made. And what to work on was again the next tricky problem, because again from a bunch of let's say people that just want to build things, you often have like a lot of random ideas, a lot of extreme things that you want to build. Again, trying to weigh out what is possible, what is not possible became very important. What we understood was that we first knew that okay, we're going to compete with people on this. We're going to have to compete with labor. We are competing on just that. So if you're just competing on that, it's easier to sell that way. Like it's easier to when you go and tell the customer that I'm giving you your ROI in 1.5 to 2 years, or I'm giving you a RAS model where you're just paying monthly and you don't have to worry about. So one of these two things had to be figured out. And now we wanted to think, if this is the route we are going, we had to understand what are those jobs that humans are bad at, carrying heavy things, which is where you have forklifts and all of that in warehouses. Probably the integrity factor is something that's always questioned from a human standpoint, that can you trust humans with high value items? Like, can you trust humans to really replicate things in the most, like, there are fluctuations of energy, there are fluctuations. So, can you guarantee quality from that on that front was another thing. And the other thing was, today warehouses are designed for people to access up to 6.5 feet, which is because again a physical limitation. Because humans can't climb up to a certain end. Most warehouses you see that you have pallet jacks and all of that, put in huge pallets on top, and then you need a forklift to bring that down. Then human breaks, but does bug breaking, and then stores it for the next human to come and pick. So many of these operations. So if you see the whole value chain of an item that is in a warehouse, the fastest form of material packing always happens through a human, or like the farmers, like the last part of any value chain in a warehouse is fastest through a human. Like especially when you're dealing with the item in smaller warehouses that at least we were targeting, which is where it became very clear that you need something where you need to redesign the warehouse and help humans to access most of the warehouse. So when all of this came together, the problem statement of how do you make the best use of the warehouse volumetrically was what we had. At the same time, you want to keep up production, you want to keep up throughputs, and you want to keep up your overall SLA of uptime of the system. Like it can't be at the risk of, I'm building a very complicated robot. It has like 20 actuators, but one actuator goes, the whole line is gone. This is one insight. The next insight we were looking at was also to add on to this was, as a young company, where is the maximum reward, effort to reward? We did some pilots with our AMRs as well, like in the textile space, in manufacturing facilities, like with the electronics manufacturer, with the textile player, a major textile, we did like 5 of their sites, and all 5 sites had different software applications. Right. So now what this meant was, and we would probably end up selling 2 or 3 robots to each site, which the ticket size per deployment was like way lower. Right. So now we were trying to understand the effort that this deployment takes versus what is the reward. Right. Are we on that path to maximize this? Then we were trying to understand how the whole ecosystem was playing out. For this whole ecosystem to fruition, for us to, as a company, to really succeed and be like that, let's say at that point at least, like the $1 billion company, you wanted to deploy a lot of robots at higher speeds, which means you have to be in a lot of warehouses, which means your technology had to be that good. Right? And for your technology to be that good, only then you'll get the distribution. If your technology is that good, you can then use partners in non-geographies and then get to that. Which means that we were looking at least a 3.5 year horizon to get to that point. Like I would assume like we'll be there by now. The problem with that was you had so many competitors coming up globally for the same thing. Like let's say one application, like I said, moving heavy material, forklifts. Right? If I wanted to build, if I was like I want to automate forklifts and I wanted to try that, if you go to a trade show abroad, right, you would find every alternative booth with a company having an AMR, doing SLAM navigation and all of that. And it's more complicated to crack that distribution unless you already had a mature product. Like there are companies in India who have cracked that, but they were probably like a little bit ahead of us on the curve and still figuring out distribution in the global market. Right? In India, you have like probably couple of companies that have actually crack that global distribution. Otherwise, most companies are very in like a very nascent stage of, let's say, sub 200 robots type of thing. So it was very clear that we wanted to target every time we enter a site and every customer we convince to buy our product or onboard Accio as a vendor, we should be able to sell make a very high ticket size sale with them with the same technology. And the only way to we were trying to weigh out the pros and cons of like what goes into a robot. Like about 45 to 50% of your cost is probably going to be your actuators and power motors or whatever you're using. Then some other things are going to be consumables and smaller microcontrollers and all of that. So it kind of boiled down to whatever you do, you are having to play these. There is no use case out there where you put a robot and you're getting extremely high returns without either changing the ecosystem or the way ecosystem works or without deploying more robots. So you either needed to play on volume or you needed to play on solving a problem which is like very difficult to solve, which would require maybe some form of ecosystem level change. So that way we then arrived at we are going to focus on swarm robotics. So which means that every site or every customer we convince, we are at least going to get one warehouse deployment. And if we're deploying in one warehouse, then our ticket size for that sale should at least be close to 2.5 3 CR in revenue. Robotics was still at a phase where deployment was the biggest bottleneck. Like comparison is Amazon just touched their fleet of 1 million robots like last week. On comparison, like automobiles, like you're deploying about 40 million automobiles. India is just running on that kind of a volume. So deployment and scale has been one of the biggest bottlenecks for robotics globally, and it is not talked about enough. So we knew that even to deploy a very good robot, right? If one robot, you probably need one really good engineer. For 3 robots, you might be able to do the same good engineer. It doesn't scale linearly. The moment you have like 20 or 25 robots, you might still only need those 3 good engineers and a bunch of technicians to support them. So the deployment cost wise, you were looking at giving a full-fledged solution. We were like, how do we give an end-to-end solution to the customer? Which means we have to pick a very specific warehouse problem. You have to either move a pallet or you have to do picking, you have to do sorting, you have to unload trucks. They were like very defined, like warehousing, they already knew their problems and they defined it, right? So we were like, all of this together, unloading seemed like a more far-fetched problem, more complex problem, needed more capital to solve, so we didn't want to go there. Sorting, we didn't have a lot of insights picked up because one, we were always looking at material movement, so our robots were not really designed for high speed at that point. At least in India, we felt like cross-belt sorters, which were already a solved problem at that time, were which is what like even a company like Vyom started their business with like cross-belt sorters. So we felt like that had already proved very well on how most use cases it could fit into because it was easy to sell conveyor belts in India. Now adding a cross-belt sorter to a conveyor belt in India was the barrier to entry was little lower, and it did tie into our global story of as a company can we create that moat to then go and raise another round of capital and then go global. Like of course for the investors as well, there has to be some technical moat as a business to scale, and that is what protects the business as well. Right? So we were trying to identify what that can be. And in 2021, there wasn't any other company in India that was looking at order picking the way we were looking at. We had a lot of data around order picking. We had enough information around how warehouses are functioning, different kinds of warehouses. Like we knew how a mother hub was functioning. We had data from the clients we were working at that point. We would work on the making their warehouses better using that data. So it was good enough to understand where the bottlenecks are. We had data about smaller warehouses. We had data about now the dark stores. So I think ROI calculations for the system was for Blinkit back in 2022 beginning, but they also were just starting out like e-commerce boom. So we didn't really want to double down on that. But the technology was progressing along that angle of how are you building the fastest and densest warehouse. So when that was the case, we decided okay, we need a swarm of robots working together and utilizing the vertical space for the warehouse. So now we have these mobile robots that we already figured out the 2D navigation part. So now we have to figure out how we attach, climb, and do all of that. Even then, there was a decision to make. Right? Like we could go into a very core software-driven product where we could then maybe look at we would probably look at vision-based navigation at that point, which was again yeah one way of addressing was like what could be the differentiator in our AMR build. And vision-based visual navigation was one, like camera-based navigation was one direction where it was unproven globally, but we were like, okay, you can make like a very offbeat bet that okay, we'll try to solve it. If we solve it, then you end up building the cheapest robots, and it's easy to crack the Indian market. If you don't solve it, then we have to figure out. So, but we were probably not confident enough to take that bet at that time. Reason to not take that bet is also like Accio's culture was very hardware driven. Like it was easier for our team to put together a prototype for a robot than put together like a full-fledged. It is just how it was designed. Like be it our recruitment, be it my own bias. Like I'm by design a mechanical engineer. I love hardware more. So I think overall our culture fit in a lot into hardware, and it was very difficult for I think a lot of our software team members also to kind of get the due in terms of the robot needs all of this for it to be autonomous. I'll be like, no,
it's amazing you say that because it's almost half the time our pitch, right? Like we are software people and we understand how hard hardware is, and it's extremely hard for us.
Yeah. So for me it's like the reverse. For me it's like the bias. Like if there's a problem, it's always to solve it with the hardware than with software because I just feel more confident about it. So I think we were going through that as well. So now this was a very mechanically hardware intensive problem of how do you build the racking, how do you design the robots, how are you going to beat gravity to attach to a system climb because it's like 3-axis 3D motion has been happening for a long time through like maybe 3D printers or through like CNC machines and other gantry based systems and all of that. But what is not easy in a lot of these things and which we also don't see how our printers work and all that. HP printers and all like there's engaging and disengaging a mechanism like any kind of gearing mechanism, getting like what our cars go through, like clutches, like how they engage. So there's a lot of complications behind that, and that is a problem. That's a very hard mechanical engineering problem to solve, which we were like, okay, that was exciting for me as well, and we were like, okay, figure out how do we crack this problem, because it kind of aligns into this thesis. And anyway, over time, we're building a moat on this whole ecosystem of how do we, like, the storage density problem, which we can deploy globally. And interestingly, I think if we were more aggressive on that path, we could have been like that global company. Like, if we had that conviction on, yeah, we're going global. We were still trying to target the India market, and now I think the path we took at that time was very right, because now this year, during all these trade shows that I'm mentioning about, too many of these Chinese and like European companies launching similar 3D system, which was very similar to in 2021 when companies were launching the AMRs. That trajectory or thought process was was validated, because some of those companies, like one of those companies, just IPO'd in Hong Kong 2 days back, and then we had our biggest competitor is a French company that had been operating for a while, but they were like, again, this was a North Star. The biggest robotics company in the warehousing and manufacturing space was a vertical integration company where they were providing a full solution and not just one part and then trying to be an integrator of multiple parts. So then again, one of our oldest like competitors was worth 2.5 billion. Walmart had just acquired a company with a similar product for about, I think, 1.5 billion at that point. So we could see that okay, this trend is there, and at that point in India, no one else had the tech. Now there are like a few other companies also having similar tech, but still now we have just positioned ourselves in that space where can you use that tech to capture what India has, and what India has today is the quick combo. So I think that way we just find ourselves well positioned to target that, because we've just been working with order picking and the form factor of robots, which solves the problem statement of quick commerce, which is like, if there's a 5,000 square foot dark store, how do you make the best volumetric utilization of that? How do you build robots that can still, we end up ordering like about like 6 to 7 orders in a minute is what they get, and how are you able to achieve that? So it's a very complex both warehouse solution design problem, robotics problem, some parts of AI problem. Like now we're seeing, and those are the systems we're building out now. So now that's where we're landed on for the last 1 year, and that's what we're focused on.
That's fantastic. You mentioned the ecosystem. Can you talk about it? Because I'm fascinated by the fact that robotics ecosystem, especially in India, seems to be way more cooperative than you would expect, and it's absolutely not the case in other industries, right? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think robotics ecosystem in India still, I feel like there should be more cooperation, and I think it's as much as all of us like definitely help each other out, but I think cooperation at a business level is still like lacking. Like cooperation at how do we put together solutions to take on titan of the industry is like still lacking, and I think that is probably because all of us are also finding our footing.
Sure.
Like all of us are figuring out where we stand, how is our growth looking like. In most cases, we are figuring out survival, right? So all of this together, I think that is the problem, and I feel like that is still pending, where our solutions collaborate, and then we are really able to crack and go up against a huge, customer, or another huge global company that has all these solutions already together. So one thing I feel why a lot of, at least I think a lot of the newer companies or all of us are more open to collaboration is that I think we've all realized how hard it is. Like we've all realized that it's not. Probably when I started operating in 2020, I was more on that. Oh, I'm going to build everything in-house. I'm going to do all of this. We're going to figure everything out. That was the kind of modus operandi that we followed. But now I think we've come to that point where slowly we feel like we've started seeing how different solutions can come together. When people are sure about certain aspects, like for example, majority of the ecosystem is still going through perfecting their robot. Like, that is my opinion, that majority of the ecosystem is still going through perfecting the technology and what they have to offer, which is a very complicated thing. Like when I say perfecting, it's not just about one robot running, right? It's about how are you going to day in, day out replicate these robots. Even when let's say a customer comes and gives you an order of 2,000 robots, how are you going to replicate that? Now this is something that people, I probably couple of companies in the whole country have cracked, and they have been alive for the last 10, 15 years, and that's what it's taken to crack it. Then when that kind of, for the lack of a better word, security sets into the ecosystem, then we start thinking about how can, like how do all of us come together, take on like a bigger company. You can use my this resource, I can use your this resource, and this is how we're going to deliver this. Like I think we are still, like say manufacturing for example, all of us probably, if it's hardware, all of us probably end up needing the same kind of machines. But I don't think people would really collaborate on that because that is still part of the moat at this point, right?
Yes.
If you do land on a competing product and your ability to execute that order is still a moat, like your ability to deploy that robot is still a moat because a make or break might be between that guy deploying the robot in 6 months and you're deploying in 2 months. We've not gone to that point where technology differentiator is like immense. So I think that is where the ecosystem is. And if you see the other ecosystems as well, right? Even if you look at software and stuff, right? It's been a lot of things have been built on open source. Like I think other ecosystems also do have that. I would say hardware is still like finding its footing, definitely, because people still haven't figured out their strong points. So I think yeah.
Could you talk about the talent piece of the ecosystem? Where is that? Because that's one thing I hear often. That
I think in India, talent is like very confused. And what I mean by that confusion is people are not ready to work towards that common goal of we're just going to obsess over this robot because we find this problem statement really cool. Once we get there, then we will figure out what the benefits are. And that I think is a lot to do with our education system and the way it is designed. Right? I've noticed friends, right? Like I've noticed people that with a very open mind to grow and really want to just work on a cool problem, learn along the way, and then figuring out how to make money on the side. They end up making a lot of money anyway towards the end because they're just learning at a rate that is incomparable to anyone else. But most of these people end up going abroad because they know that that ecosystem and that free way of operation and the complex problems, right? There is more risk appetite there. And I know like a lot of my smart friends who end up doing that. And I think that is one problem. The brain drain problem is definitely there for the robotics ecosystem to really take off. Because I know for a fact, if let's say some of the like our first team, right? I think our first team was 6 people. 4 people have moved abroad and are doing really well for themselves. And they all went to top universities. These are people that I would have definitely wanted to like build for the longer term, like because they were just people driven by building cool things. That is like again a personal decision. The reason that you make that personal decision is also because you don't have good enough higher education that is comparable, like especially AI, robotics, and all of that. You can't really call out a lab in India that is like creating all of this disruption with a free. It's not that we don't have the kind of professors with that thought process, or it's not that. But when you compare the funding of a lab in let's say a CMU or an MIT versus what these labs are getting, like just the ability to fail because the cost of hardware is the same. The cost of most of your GPUs is the same. Like if you have to build an AI, so there is no win there. Like just because our fee might be lesser, but to build out any tech is like the R&D cost is like kind of still the same in terms of hardware. Right? So there's no victory there, and considering there's no win there, you need that kind of capital and free thinking flowing. That I think is like one of the biggest problem where people just don't have the mind space to experiment. And in the other side of the spectrum, for most people, it becomes very goal oriented. Right? For me, it's very annoying when like freshers care about their let's say job title. Like I'm like, how does it matter? Like we should just be working towards like this goal, and you should just trust this machine. And truth is, they're talented, but people don't have enough foresight and free thinking that 5 years later, if I'm gaining so much knowledge, I really don't have to worry about a job or my title. I'm still going to be one of the best in the industry, and I'm still going to find what's happening. So I think those are the kind of problems I feel people just need to really be a little bit more behind creating impact. I really like those kind of people. When I work with them inside Accio itself, it's like I get energy from them, right? And these might be just freshers. They don't necessarily have to be like the most experienced people. But the kind of willingness to just hammer away at a problem, because these are uncharted territories, right? You might end up, supply chain might be a problem. Like for example, most of us are procuring things from China. The volumes that we are procuring from in China, there is literally no reason for a Chinese. Like you are caught off guard if the Chinese vendor is like, I'm not supplying because we are not still procuring in thousands. Like they are still not probably shipping motors or batteries and stuff to India, like for robotics specifically, in maybe like in 10,000 or 20,000, which is where EV or like the automobile ecosystem has hit that scale and they see the benefits of support industries and all of that popping up. Now, when this is the case, right, the only thing you can rely on is internally as a team, right? If can you have together another solution? That's like literally the only thing you have in your hands. Can you use another motor to deliver? Can you build robots that can fit into multiple things and can you still manage them properly? Now, all of this like becomes fairly complicated when you don't have an obsessed team that is very worried about, oh, what am I going to do today? It's like it's that mentality of how am I getting affected by all of this rather than how do I just build. So I think that is, and if you ask me, like probably college, like I think the places that I got to work at, and I felt like that was the primary thing that I really enjoyed. Of I wouldn't really care about, yeah, am I getting that stipend or not? Am I not? It's just that I'm getting to build this and build this. I'll figure something else out. So I think that confidence education system has to like start driving, and that is not happening today. So I would only blame like the students, but it's like a chicken and egg problem. Like somewhere that change has to happen, and I think that the moment that change happens, we obviously have smart people. We know that a lot of these people, be it all the AI engineers that are earning as per latest news in millions, and all of the other folks that are building in robotics. So many really great founders that I know that are building out of the US, and a lot of their team members are based out of the US. So there's definitely amazing talent that we have. It's just that do they have the ecosystem to build? And especially in robotics, let's say if you pick the wrong problem, right, and you're stuck in this loop of having to raise funds, that is something that we were stuck on, like because we were literally like I think when we got our first any kind of external money coming in, we were probably 21, and at 21 we really don't have context on what lies in front of us. And at that point, when an investor comes and says you're not meeting revenue targets, or a customer is like I want a robot tomorrow, you feel like you are the one making the mistake, and you fail to see that the robot needs more time, and you maybe end up like just trying to force the team to really deliver. The reason for that is again scarcity, right? Like we are just thinking about survival. In the other end of the spectrum, if there is like enough money to play around, right, and if there is enough resources to play around, then you're like, yeah, I mean, if I fail today, I can just still figure out, and then you focus on technological excellence rather than survival. So I think all of those things come together, and I think as an ecosystem, I think today where Indian robotics ecosystem stands, be it from talent or be it from company side, is that we still have to prove ourselves. Like we still have to earn the right to win, and then I think even the talent will start coming back. Then the money will start flowing and everything. And I think that's up to people like us to kind of piece together.
I agree. So we've talked about the where Accio has been. We've talked about the present. Let's talk about the future. Between how the market is evolving, the spaces that you play in, how those are evolving, and especially how technology is evolving with AI, with vibe coding, with humanoids. What does the future look like for you, and how?
For us, again, yeah. So like I said, we were designed to just build stuff. We were not designed to build warehouse robots essentially when we started off. Today, I think our journey, most critical thing is as a team, we have a very important thing to prove, which is product market fit. Of course, there are like aspirations around building in other sectors which are more fun, more higher impact. Then robotics is where we also see AI really playing a key role. The way we are using AI or way we are looking at AI more than on our robots is like how do we build more robots faster with AI? Like that is our outlook to AI. The only place where we feel in our sector AI plays a huge role is fast tracking deployments, which is going to be a part of it. But building more robots also, if we are able to improve, like as a hardware team, most of the things that you do is like decision making, right? In terms of what kind of algorithms do you use for your managing your fleet, to what kind of hardware decisions you make, from do I add a motor for this particular application or do I add a motor for this particular application? How does the supply chain get affected as a matter of that? How can I fast track a lot of my supply chain delay? So this is where we are very actively imbibing a lot of AI tools, because like I said in the beginning, we are not designed for as much of software innovation as we are designed for hardware innovation, and I think that is just I am the villain when it comes to that. But because of that, we this is where we are looking at AI, and then vibe coding and all becomes like a lot more easier, because you are not doing high critical robotic stuff, which is more difficult to vibe code. You're doing like more operation stuff, which is easier to vibe code. So I think that is where we are looking at it. But future wise, yeah, I think for me there's always this thing of what is the next cool problem to solve. We obviously don't see ourselves solving for the longer run only on like the governing thing was always building those cool things and contributing to the Indian ecosystem, creating that kind of talent capability out of India. So next is like, yeah, we definitely want to look at how do we help the ecosystem in a way that we can go more deeper into the value chain from, let's say, motors. Right? EV has seen that benefit. Like EV has seen that benefit of volumes getting a lot more Indian manufacturers, at least for lot of the low cost motors. Like if you're looking like at an e-bike, you can find an Indian vendor for a motor, and you have small factories designing and building those motors as well because of the huge demand and volume. robotics needs to get there. For robotics to get there, this is where ecosystem play I feel like will be a very huge piece. Which is where I want to hit PMF, I want to really stabilize what we are doing, and then look at how do we bring the cost of these things down when a lot of these manufacturers are seeing visibility for volumes. And how do we get those visibility is that as the end solution providers, we need to have confidence over our volumes, right? Which is when either if we have to invest in a lot of those things by ourselves, or like my end thing is like, can I have like a whole factory of or a maker house of robots where you have different things, everything being built in house and you're able to build it, because that means the moat of any form factor you have. Like if I'm able to control how motors get built, if I'm able to control how a lot of the mechanical systems get built, if I'm able to control how a lot of the hardware firmware gets built, I can essentially start churning out form factors often, right? And then I feel the future intelligence is going to get commodities. We're seeing that already. We're seeing how, let's say, Meta is launching models, Google is launching models for physical AI, Hugging Face is launching open source models. So I think we are heading towards that path where intelligence for robotics might not be the differentiator essentially, and it will be the right to win of people with that kind of capital and that kind of training capability. For example, like a company like Physical Intelligence that raised like north of $100 million. Like those kind of companies will be able to do that. But I don't think us sitting out of India, still in that PMF phase, or founders, like I would say, let's say if me and Tuhin had built another huge SaaS business like 10 years back, and then now we've already proved our execution capability, and then now I can go to our VCs and be like, give us $100 million, and this is what we're going to do. We haven't earned that right to win as well, so we need to prove ourselves first. So we are like, I think because of the risk involved, we need to like go step by step, and we are ready to play out the long-term game. Like simple comparison, like from last week, the same motor, like we were like, okay, should we switch our motors to a different architecture so that we will find the supply chain in India? We went to that extent, and even then, right, China is beating us out by 30%, and these motors are being made in somewhere in Allahabad or something, and still China is beating us out by like 20-30%, and like not like it's 20-30% the cost. So it just shows that I literally like I've been having serious conversations with them, like, see, I want to give you like these kind of volumes if we're expanding. What does it take then? What does it take? Like they just don't want to buzz there. Like it's just not possible, because I think they're also not able to see the end goal, because I'm sure this conversation a lot of people would have had with them. Right? What will be the cost and volume? But then when I actually go and send that PO that, bro, this is what I need this in 6 months, and this is like a 5,000 motor order, then that's when I'll also. So I think there's an ecosystem level inertia that needs to be broken for robotics. Like building sensors here, we don't have a lot of that. So we want to slowly start getting there, because I think today for India, for robotics to be affordable in India, and for us to solve a lot of the problems in India, we can't deal with the balance sheet of we deal with our margins and also our vendors' margins, and then their vendors' margin. Like for example, if it's a motor, right, and it's being made in India, first I'm dealing with making the motor manufacturer's company run. Then he's buying magnets from someone else. He's dealing with their this thing, and then he's buying control systems from. So all of this together, it becomes very difficult to build an extremely cheap robot that you can literally throw away. But there is a future where that is possible, which is why, like, if you look at the likes of Tesla is trying to do for humanoids, like figure out Tesla is trying to do for humanoids, we're happy doing that for simpler robots. And I think that is a more achievable vision for the scale that we operate in, and in this country. I feel simple thing, our robots start making sense if we're able to make it at 30 to 40% the cost. In India, if we're able to make it at 30 to 40% cost that we are doing today. To do that, if we get a lot of this in-house, it will happen. But that is like a 5-10 year journey, huge amount of capital journey, and I think we just want to be there. That's where we see the future. I mean, at least I'm not a personal fan of the humanoid form factor. Like right now, I know the complexity behind adding 1 degree of freedom on the robot. It's not just about the design. It's like when you add 1 degree of freedom, there is safety associated to it. Then there is supply chain associated to it. Then there is the moment that supply chain, like the moment you're looking at the BOM of that one joint, you have so many other smaller mechanical parts that are needed for the reliability of that. Then you're looking at maintenance. Then the bigger question that I'm still trying to find an answer for a bipedal humanoid is, what if it's at a home and there's a kid playing there and it falls on the kid? Like in a mobile robot, it's that basic problem that I'm worried about. It's like for a mobile robot, there are safety systems created. Like you have ISO standards that it runs by, and the robot doesn't topple. Like if it's there, it's there. There's a safety mechanism and all of that. But for a humanoid, even if you build all the safety systems, it is center of gravity. Again, you're fighting gravity. So now if it's stuck in a weird pose, it falls down. So how are you solving for that, especially for humanoid robotics at home? Because for humanoid robotics to really scale, you need it to be consumer hardware. And for it, why? Because that's why mobile phones work, that's why cars work, that's why automobile work. For it to be consumer hardware, you need all of this to be thought out. So I'm not sure. I'm sure there are brighter minds than me working on this, but I don't know what the solution is. So I feel they have like my, and when you look at manufacturing or warehousing use cases or like any industrial use cases, then I feel it's better off trying to build use case specific robots that are doing an amazing job right at that use case and really killing that use case, rather than a general purpose humanoid that is getting on a forklift and driving that forklift if that's what we're aiming. I feel like that is very counterintuitive.
Specificity versus versatility.
Yeah, specificity versus versatility. I feel that is like versatility. If you humanoids don't work if you unless you crack the commercial aspect of it, because then you are not able to drive the cost down for it to like a 15,000 like Optimus they want to build it at like $15,000 to $20,000. That cost kind of works out because if you're buying a robot at that cost, the annual like you're paying a labor like probably 45,000 or closer to $35,000 a year. So that kind of works out. But to get that, you need the volumes. Now to achieve those, it's like a chicken and egg problem. Now you need to solve a big problem there. And if you don't get there, you specific robots will always win. Our robots, if it's like picking an item out of the bin, we are doing that with the 3-axis robot. Now you are adding so many degrees of freedom, so many end effectors, so many things to that. Maintenance is a huge challenge. How are we going to build the support ecosystem for this? Right? Like the number of cables and things going to like the technicians that you need for handling these systems is going to be like again through the roof. So I think I'm just going to wait for the brighter minds to crack it and then I'll understand what I'm missing out. But that's where I think there are like again interesting ways that people are building humanoids, right? Like again, the hardware approach really matters. Like there is like one company I don't know if you heard of that is just trying to build the proper skeleton and muscle based actuation rather than go for like an actuator based thing where they're trying to replicate muscles to do this action rather than a motor to do this action. So I think those are like different innovative approaches to do this. But in any case, the way these guys are headed, I think physical intelligence is going to be solved in like 2-3 years, and that will be solved with someone with that 150, $200 million, not by a couple of 27-year-olds sitting in Bangalore. So we are away from that. So we feel like that's where we are at. Like we feel we can. There is still a white space in robotics and hardware in India. If we solve that, we can build cheap enough robots for India. That is where we want to be seeing the future.
Thank you so much, Pranav, for your great insights about the Indian ecosystem, about robotics. And despite your humility, I do think you will take us to the future of robotics.
Thank you so much, Aditya. Thank you for having me. And hopefully, like you mentioned, at some point we are able to collaborate with our solutions together.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.